North Central Healthcare, and I would like to introduce the legislators standing with me. So we have Representative Pat Snyder, Senator Mary Felskowski, Senator Pat Teston, Representative Scott Krug, Representative Donna Roser, Representative Calvin Callahan, and Representative John Spiros.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and thank you all for coming. It's pretty exciting times right now. As the introductions were made, my colleagues and I passed a tremendous budget, kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We took advantage of it. I'm going to touch on some of the things that are specific right here to the Wausau area. And of course, we're at one of the key points of this budget, and that is the North Central Healthcare and the mental hospital beds. We are able to put into the budget $5 million for behavior health expansion here at North Central. This increased capacity for the number of inpatient psychiatric rooms from 10 to 16. It increases the number of adult crisis stabilization beds from 12 to 16. It adds detoxification bed capacity from 0 to 5. It increases the residential substance treatment beds from 15 to 40. It will allow crisis and emergency services to operate stabilization services 24/7. It also expands coverage, besides the 3 counties currently, to Oneida, Forest, and Vilas counties, and possibly even more. Some other areas that affect this is our Marathon County Assistant District Attorney. Last budget cycle, during the veto process, Governor Evers did remove one of our district attorneys from Marathon County to serve in Milwaukee County. This budget will restore that lost ADA. Another area that's kind of near and dear to my heart is child care. We're making targeted investments to increase the access to quality child care and provide safe and appropriate options for children at risk. We are helping create stability in the child care industry by increasing payments for child care subsidies to get closer to the market rates. We're continuing investments in programs that protect our most vulnerable children and make sure that they have the best possible outcomes. This budget increases the Wisconsin shares rates to 65th percentile. Now that was an increase from 30 percentile. So in doing this, we hope that this will have more assistance for low-income families using federal dollars. By providing the substantial increase in these rates, we continue to help these families while helping to create stability in the child care industry by funding state commitment where we have underpaid in the past. Also, a $300,000 investment in Wendy's Wonderful Kids program at the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. This assists in finding permanent placements for these children. Their average age of placement for Wendy's Wonderful Kids is 11 years of age, and that's important. A lot of times we hear of adoptions and things, and it's usually the young toddlers, infants. Well, they place some of the kids that have been in foster programs, and the average age is 11. Additional funding to support county child support enforcement, which will continue to reduce public assistance costs by ensuring non-custodial parents are providing ongoing and consistent support for their children. It increases funding by $2 million for targeted safety support funds and in-home safety services. It also provides an additional $264,000 over the biennium to the Boys and Girls Club of America to support their expansion of the B-grade graduate program to additional Wisconsin counties, including ours right here in Wausau. We've invested an additional $285,560 in grant programs for adult literacy and GED testing under the TANF program. And we also put money in the JFC Supplemental Fund to accommodate the state taking over subsidized guardianship payments to families, which is currently paid for by our counties. This subsidized guardianship offers a way for children in foster care to reach permanence, and it could also be more accurately be described as subsidized permanency. And utilizing the state funding for this program, it will allow the counties to use their funding for other child welfare programs. So that's kind of the touch in the areas that I wanted to bring up. I want to introduce the JFC member and Senator Mary Felskowski.
Well, good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here. As you can see from what you heard from Representative Snyder, you're going to hear from the rest of my colleagues about each individual part of the budget. But if we wanted to talk about all the good things in the budget, we'd be here till about 5 o'clock this afternoon. I want to do just a quick overview. I had the pleasure of sitting on the Joint Finance Committee. I'll be honest, it's a lot of work putting that budget together, but it's extremely rewarding this time around. We funded our priorities, whether those priorities were healthcare, roads, schools, and I think the biggest thing that I want to talk about is a $2.4 billion tax cut. Now, we've been accused of tax cuts for the uber wealthy. Let me give you an example of who this tax cut is going to help. A typical family in northern Wisconsin, mom, dad, 2 children making $80,000 a year. The average tax cut that they will see is $1,200 a year between income and property taxes. Now, $80,000 a year for a typical family of 4, I don't think we're talking about the uber wealthy. And what can a family of 4 do with that additional $1,200? Well, they can spend it a lot wiser than what Madison will spend it. In addition to that, there's money for broadband. You know, we put money into, we authorize bonding for broadband. People are like, well, why would you do that? We have all this money sitting around. One of the things that happens when you sit on the JFC team is you get to do a deep dive with all the agencies. The Public Service Commission is sitting on $600 million that has not been authorized yet for broadband expansion. Charter has authorized $500 million for broadband expansion in northern Wisconsin, and the governor has $100 million. But when you add that all up, it's over $1.2 billion that is sitting there ready right now for broadband expansion grants. We have money set aside if that money can be utilized. But we all know Wisconsin, 6 months of construction and 6 months of winter. We don't have the contractor capacity to use more than the dollars that are available now. So why would we commit even more of your dollars instead of giving it back to you? The resources are there if by some miracle they can get through this $1.2 billion. But right now, they've got to use that up before there's even the capacity for more money. In addition to that, I think one of the largest things that we're doing is TAD funding. TAD funding helps people, it's treatment and diversion programs. So people that have repeated challenges with excess alcohol and drug use, these TAD courts work. And right now they're not expanded to all the counties. Well, we put money to expand them, and that's going to help northeastern Wisconsin from here north where we don't have TAD courts. We put money into increased wages for public employees. We put money into the counties for social services. We put money into our roads. We put money into our schools. We put money back in your pockets. This is a win budget, and I'm very proud to have helped craft it. Now I'd like to introduce Senator Pat Teston. Pat is the chairman of the Health Committee, and he is one of our biggest assets in the Senate.
Well, thank you, Senator Felskowski, and really want to thank you for your work on the budget and being a strong voice and advocate for both Central and Northern Wisconsin, and to all my colleagues from the Central and Northern Wisconsin delegation for their support on what can only be described as a historic budget for the state of Wisconsin. If you take a look at the budget that was introduced by the governor to the budget that now sits on his desk, it is a night and day difference. We took a budget that was going to raise taxes by over $1 billion, and instead record tax cuts to the tune of nearly $3.4 billion for the taxpayers of the state. But more importantly, this is a budget that we did not allow the governor to turn back the hands of time and repeal the reforms over the course of the last decade that have saved the state nearly $15 billion. So I'm extremely happy with the product that we came up with. This was my 3rd budget that I voted on, and probably the one I'm most proud to say I've supported. But not only for the big ticket items, I'm extremely proud of the budget for what it does for our farmers in rural Wisconsin. So throughout the pandemic, we realized how fragile our food supply chain is, which is why over the course of this biennium, we are going to invest $800,000 for meat processor grants. We also set aside $1 million for the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection to coordinate with WEDC to develop a Wisconsin initiative for agricultural exports. I think that is one thing we have heard from our farmers time and time again. If you can open up more markets for us, we can compete. We're also going to increase the number of meat inspectors in the state. which will also draw down 2 more inspectors from the federal government. What I'm really proud to see is that we invest in our community health centers, $1 million over the course of this biennium. These are clinics that help in rural areas and underserved areas of the state so that individuals have access to health care and also dental care. When we take a look at what was done in long-term care, we made huge investments that went above and beyond what the governor had proposed. We provided an additional $440 million in OLF funds for home rate increases, direct care and personal care rate increases over this budget. We had an additional $252 million in OLF funds for nursing home reimbursement rate increases, with $104 million OLF funds going to staff who perform direct care over this biennium. Both of these amounts are higher than what the governor had proposed. An additional $104 million in OLF funds over this budget for the direct caregivers and family care. Again, this is higher than what the governor has proposed. An additional $78 million in OLF funds for personal care rate increases to support staff and personal care service agencies who perform direct care. We also provided $3 million in OLF funds over this biennium for home health skilled nursing services, which the governor didn't include in this budget. So once again, the Republican legislature has proven that we can cut taxes while making critical investments in key areas of our state. This is a budget that is a win for the state, it is a win for the taxpayers, and it puts Wisconsin on the right track to fully recover from the economic downturn caused by the pandemic and the government response to it. So I'm happy to introduce my good friend, State Representative Scott Krug of the Wisconsin Rapids area, to talk about the investments that were made into K-12 education.
Good morning, and thanks for being here today so we can talk about this budget that has come across all of our desks the last 6 months that we've all worked very hard to fight for North Central and Central Wisconsin on. My colleagues have talked about a few of the things already. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is how great a budget this is for education. And I think this is one of the big things that has been undersold in the public, because our education budget is historic again. And again, I say again, because we did this the last 2 budgets in a row. Historic levels of investment. So this budget, the investments we're making right now finally brings us back to 2/3 of funding from the state of Wisconsin to our public school system. That's the first time this has happened in a generation. So as my colleagues have said, being able to deliver those tax dollars back to the individuals in North Central Wisconsin, Central Wisconsin, and deliver 2/3 funding is a big accomplishment. We have $350 million set aside in this budget to address future issues that might arise, right? We were kind of caught off guard with COVID and the impacts it had with education. We want to make sure that if something else new came up that we weren't aware of, that we have money set aside. So even on top of the investments that are being made was a $350 million set aside. This huge influx of federal dollars is something that doesn't get discussed in the best light from time to time. So the way that we approached it in the legislature is we met the very stringent maintenance of effort requirements from the federal government to draw down an extra $1.5 billion for our school district here in the state of Wisconsin. So, just locally, that equates to another $10.5 million for the Wausau School District, another $4.5 million for the DC Everest District, $7 million for the Wisconsin Rapids School District, another $6 million for Stevens Point. These dollars make a huge difference in each of our communities. So we're glad that we were able to meet those requirements of the federal government to draw in all of these dollars that they're sending to us. So between the 3 pots of money that the federal government has sent to K through 12 in the state of Wisconsin, it's $2.2 billion on top of our state investment. And these restrictions that the federal government have put in place are actually very flexible. So our school districts will be able to spend these dollars in the classrooms. We know over the past year that student mental health has taken a big hit. It's one of the things I've talked about the most in the work that I've been doing, trying to figure out a way for our students to be able to get back and socialize and have those interactions and have that structure has been something that we've fallen a little bit behind on because of COVID. So this budget, we actually double the investment that we had in student mental health in K through 12, from $6 million to $12 million over the biennium. And one of the things that all of us standing here, we all represent rural districts in the state of Wisconsin. So every single budget, we fight really hard to make sure that our sparsity aid helps us get these rural school districts on the level playing field, that we cover the high cost transportation aid that some of these districts have to deal with. So we want to make sure our rural schools stay on that same level. And then finally, in education, one of the things that's been really talked about a lot by constituents and classrooms and education professionals is special education funding. One of the things that Governor Evers, when he was superintendent of schools, before his election, talked about was trying to get the state to 30% of funding for all special education in the state of Wisconsin. This budget does that. With an extra $86 million investment into special education funds, we're meeting those goals that Governor Evers had proposed as a statewide superintendent. I think, as we go through and talk about education over the next few months and years, people will see that this budget will really make a difference in outcomes for students, not only on their scores and their levels of excellence, but in the classroom, we're going to see a big difference for each of these students. We got some supporters rolling in.
Yeah, I see that.
The other thing I wanted to touch on a little bit, we wanted to talk about environmental issues. It's something that each budget we try to fight for central Wisconsin and northern Wisconsin, because clean water is one of the biggest things we deal with in the legislature the last 10 years. One of the biggest things we wanted to talk about was the stewardship fund. There was a lot of discussion whether the stewardship would be maintained in the state budget or not. We've got a 4-year reauthorization at the current funding levels. Everybody give them a wave. That's awesome. I love having parades at press conferences.
They love the budget too.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So on top of just reauthorizing that stewardship fund, so we have sportsmen's and recreational opportunities in the state of Wisconsin maintained, we wanted to make sure that the bonding level was decreased a little bit in that category too. So we're going to be using more cash infusion into this program to make sure it's sustainable. On the clean water side, one of the biggest things in central and northern Wisconsin we've heard about a lot over the last few years is PFAS. And PFAS contamination becoming more and more widespread. This budget invests an additional $1 million to combat PFAS contamination through firefighting foams. The state's really starting to take a bigger look at this to try to be more proactive than reactive. When it comes to clean water, one of the biggest things we talk about is nitrate contamination, especially in some of the central areas of the state. We had $2 million for well compensation program in this budget. We added another $6.5 million for rural non-point programs, which is where we work with farmers directly to help reduce phosphorus inputs into our lakes, rivers, and streams. We expanded the producer-led watershed program, where we work with those producers as well to make sure that they can work with their local watersheds to keep our local waters clean. We fully funded a second position for our county conservation officers in each of our counties in the state of Wisconsin. There's $7 million more for our soil resource management program, which is huge for farmers to try to make sure that they're maintaining the excellence of their fields. And then finally, another $25 million investment. $25 million investment into the Safe Water Drinking Program here in the state of Wisconsin for municipalities to be able to replace failing systems. When we talk about those two areas, education and the environment, it's something that has caused me to have concerns over budgets in the past, but this budget made it really easy to vote for in those categories. So I appreciate my colleagues taking those efforts to help work with us on those. And next I want to introduce State Representative Donna Rosar to talk about nurse education and tax cuts a little bit more.
So good morning. I'd like to thank you for making the effort to come today, and I'd also like to thank my colleagues for their efforts in making it here today. As a freshman legislator, this was very exciting for me to participate in this historic budget. I'd like to remind you all that this budget passed with bipartisan effort, and we don't want to miss that, because a lot that we do in Madison, as I'm learning, does receive bipartisan support. And so it needs to be said that this budget passed with bipartisan support. Would also like to thank the JFC. I watched from afar. I did sit in for a little while to see the proceedings, and co-chair Mark Bourne texted me while I was sitting there and asked me if I was learning by fire by sitting there. So that was kind of an interesting thing. I'd like to approach the budget from a couple of ways. Number one, I think you all know that I serve still as a Wood County Board Supervisor. So this budget was a great budget for things for counties. It was good for towns, especially because of the investment in our roads and our broadband, in increased in general transportation aids, all positive things for rural Wisconsin. It's already been talked about our investment in long-term care facilities. Wood County owns 2 long-term care facilities. Clark County Health Center is in my district, as well as other long-term care facilities. And so investing in those was really a priority that I was working toward. Also, the staff that's taken care of our vulnerable people over these months deserve to be recognized for the wonderful work that they've done over these months. I think you also know that I'm a retired nurse educator. I retired in May from the faculty at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire College of Nursing at the Marshfield site. So I was really excited to see that $5 million investment of GPR dollars to encourage and assist nurses to pursue master's and doctoral degrees to help with our nursing workforce. When I retired as a nurse educator, it was a big joke that I was contributing to the workforce problems, and I just had to say, but I'm going to Madison to fight so that we can get more nurse educators, so I was pleased with that investment. This is a great budget for Wisconsin, the taxpayers, and our great state's future. Decreasing bonding, we didn't mention that, but we're borrowing less, which will be a really great thing. Increasing our savings, putting more money into our rainy day savings account. So if we get hit with COVID again, like Representative, I just elevated you.
Oh yeah, don't
Representative Krug mentioned, we need to have some savings. And we do that in our personal budget, so it's important to do it. And then returning money to the hardworking families of Wisconsin is what I hope to be able to accomplish and participate in as a freshman legislator. So I'm just thrilled about that. Any day a tax is reduced or eliminated is a good day. And I know I'm going off script a little bit, but I want to remind you that AB 191 ended the personal property tax. It punishes people for being in business, and I think that we need to remember that we eliminated that tax in the state assembly on Wednesday, and that needs to be remembered, and it's a wonderful thing when we can eliminate a tax. Thank you. Oh, and now I would like to introduce Representative Calvin Callahan.
Good morning. I'd like to touch on broadband a little bit more. So prior to COVID-19, legislative Republicans knew that expanding broadband was a top priority. That priority grew along with the pandemic. We saw how critically important broadband is, as many have had to live, work, learn, and even virtually visit our healthcare providers. If you remember last budget, we provided an additional $44 million in broadband expansion grants, the most ever program that Republicans created in 2013. Earlier this year, we also passed a bill that invested $500 million in federal funding into high-speed broadband, which later Governor Evers vetoed. In this budget, the legislature continued those investments. Republicans continue to deliver on our promises to invest in broadband. This broadband provides $125 million in newly authorized bonding in the upcoming biennium for broadband expansion. The budget also provides an estimated additional $4 million for broadband expansion grants. Legislative Republicans will continue our efforts to improve Wisconsin's broadband infrastructure even outside of the budget. I constantly hear of the need for broadband not just in the Northwoods, but throughout the entire state. It's not going away anytime soon. It is no longer an option, it is a necessity. Broadband is and will be a top priority for legislative Republicans. And it is my hope that Governor Evers signs this budget to bring Wisconsin up to speed. And with that, I will give it to Representative Spiro.
Thank you all. There's a movie called Draft Day. And at the end of Draft Day, the owner says, "We had a wonderful draft." Everybody's yelling Super Bowl. Well, I'm going to say we had a wonderful budget. Quite honestly, I think for the state as a whole, the state has won. And what I want to talk about is transportation. You know, being an executive in a transportation and trucking company, I understand how important it is to have safe and reliable roads. I think we all understand that. One of the things that when I went and knocked on doors, people talked about most were roads. So what are we doing? We put money into roads and we have less borrowing. First time in 20 years, our borrowing is down to the level it is. We've also put $100 million into the LRIP program for our local communities. Now, last time we put $90 million into that, The governor vetoed 15 million of that, and the Supreme Court overrode that veto, which is a good thing. But the 100 million in local roads is huge. This is the third budget in a row with significant local transportation aid increases. State highway rehabilitation, put 60 million into that. That's again huge. Our budget also includes over $300 million in less borrowing, like I just said, over 20 years now. That's an outstanding deal. And then for our towns, I continue to hear from our towns that we can't fix our roads. We don't have enough money. So what we did with the towns, we proved a fix that basically low value rural towns can receive nearly all of the general transportation aids and don't lose state aid because they don't want to raise property taxes and or low spenders. Now what happens is there's a 3-year average. So what we did is basically say, even with that 3-year average, you aren't going to be lower. We can go ahead and take care of you. And I think that's a huge win for our towns. One of those things I heard from the town members when I went to a number of the board meetings. We enacted long-term revenue increases for transportation, provide nearly, again, $300 million CPR in the transportation fund, an additional $200 million in CPR above current law. And what we did is, because of COVID really cut down the transportation fund because people weren't traveling, people weren't buying gas. So we had to do is supplement that. So we supplemented that in a way that should take care of things moving forward. So again, I think we had a great budget. I want to thank basically, the joint finance. I know Mary, you guys did a great job. I want to thank my colleagues as well. And now is it Jill? Yep, we'll bring Jill back. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you again to all of you for joining us today at North Central Healthcare. I think Representative Snyder did a really nice job in highlighting some of the things in this budget that will benefit this organization specifically. So I'd just like to talk for a brief minute about the people that these dollars are going to go to help. You can hear a lot of activity on our campus. We are working on some renovations. We had a group of our clients come by with a parade. People are coming and going out of our outpatient clinics. And these are the kinds of people we serve. They have disabilities, they have mental health and substance use disorders, some require hospitalization and psychiatry services. We take care of people in our long-term care facilities, many of whom don't have a lot of ability to pay. So the investments in nursing home reimbursement rates, investments in mental health, and the $5 million going to our inpatient services are really changing the world for a lot of these people. So I'd like to thank you all for your investments in North Central Healthcare.
I think we could take some questions.